I'll ask everybody in the room before we go live. A shorter, clean cut attorney isn't always here all the time. Talk on data privacy. Right
Yeah.
here, clean cut hair, about 5'5" tall, glasses.
Oh, hold on, we might be live.
We're now live.
We are now?
Yes. Okay.
Okay. Great. Okay, so this is Senate Committee on Institutions. Today is, what is today? Thursday, January 22nd. And we are here. We have two items or two folks helping us with the governor's proposed 2026 budget. And we're specifically looking at the capital budget. And we'll start first with Nick Kramer, Chief Operating Officer, Administration, and then we will hear from Scott Moore unless they want to switch.
I'm happy to lead off back there.
Yes.
Works for you.
Please, because that's the,
Try to save Scott and all the tricky stuff. Well, I'm disappointed that flowers were so lovely. I thought that was gonna hurt my face.
their
No.
senator major.
Yes. It's not gonna be flowers. My birthday.
Which is today.
No, it was
2 days.
2 days ago.
All right, well, so for the record, Nick Kramer, Chief Operating Officer of the Agency of Administration. Good to be back with the committee and appreciate your time. So I launched everything out there. Is that
Yes,
true?
and I just want to refer you to this document, which is what Nick has.
Yeah, oh, sorry, yes. I know.
And-
No. Here's
Hang on,
your
please.
space, not mine.
It's a budget adjustment, so I'd like you to talk about that a
Yes.
little bit because we haven't had that title on it.
Yeah.
As far as,
So I will start from the very beginning, Madam Chair, and I, as always, will probably err on the side of over explaining, and so please rush me along if things are repetitive to the committee members, but I always think it's better to err on that side than the opposite, right?
I agree.
So, yes, as the chair pointed out, I will be walking through this input, which I understand is also posted online for anybody not in the room. This is the governor's capital budget adjustment proposal for the biennial capital bill that covers fiscal years 2026 and 2027. So committee members will, of course, remember that last year we presented the biennial capital bill proposal, which is a bill spanning the fiscal years totaling. Ultimately, the bill has passed totaled about $127 million in capital spending, which I will touch on in a second when I walk through the governor's letter. This, just to situate in context, this is the midpoint adjustment to that bill, which we do every year or every other year with the capital bill, right? Come back and take a look at, do we have any new revenue, any new bonding capacity? Are there some projects that it makes sense to divert funding? They finish, there's possible amounts for reallocation. It's a true up based on expectations that have shifted since the time of passage. And so I guess I'll start to encourage members to open up, which most have, to the governor's letter. I think the governor's letter to the legislature touches on a couple of points I'd like to start with, which is, as I said, the biennial bill last year totaled $127 million. About 87% of that, almost 90%, was bond funded, right? So this committee authorizes capital expenditures that are supported by general obligation backed bonds, generally that have a 20-year lifespan. And that is traditionally how the capital bill has been funded. But there was also 13% of the bill last year that was funded by appropriations from the cash fund for essential investments, or cash fund for capital projects and essential investments. It's got kind of a long title, so I just henceforth say CAT fund. The key difference there, right? That's a pay-as-you-go mechanism. You're not bonding, you're not borrowing to support capital projects, so there are no interest payments on those capital projects. So it's ultimately cheaper funding over the life of a bond. So last year, 127 million total, about 87% bond back, about 13% cash funding. Now this year, the proposal when you take all the reallocations and all the funding sources and mix it all together, there's about $33.5 million of action, which is actually pretty significant for an adjustment year. They typically, for those that haven't been around for decades, they typically are like between 10 and maybe 15 million. I mean, on the bond funded side of things, there's really a limited pool of additional capacity in an adjustment year. So the fact that we have $33.5 million this year is primarily driven by the cash fund, right? And that's an annual mechanism, as a statutory transfer. I've been in here ad nauseum describing in prior years, that grows over time and is tied basically to overall general fund growth. So this year, of that $33.5 million, just 30% of that is funded by bond-backed appropriations, and 70% is cash funded. So that's a real flip-flop from 8713 to 3070, right? And the point that the governor makes in the letter is just that this is consistent with some of the messaging you've heard from the administration over the last couple of years, that really the future of capital spending and capital projects is not going to be solely bond-backed anymore, right? We as our debt recommendations have stayed level or gone down, and the costs of everything have gone up, we really, really need to be looking towards a future where a significant portion of our capital spending is backed by cash fund, which we believe in, continue to believe is a sort of cornerstone of fiscal discipline. So excited to be in front of you presenting this budget that really leverages that tool. I'll pause there if there are questions on that.
Just a comment, and you've heard this before, there is a reason and a purpose to bonding, because we're not one family, we're a government, and we have different customers throughout the years. And many of the items that we pay for in this committee are to last 40 years, 50 years. And so the folks who are going to be there in 40 years, 50 years should help pay for it. So that's the reason for the bonding. I do agree that a capital fund, or a cash portion makes sense. And the way that it's been described by the administration is that that would be for things like engineering, where you don't necessarily know that the project's going to happen. And so those soft costs, and typically at the initial stage of a project.
So appreciate the comment, certainly, Madam Chair. Yeah, and actually the opportunity for a point of clarification. Yes, agreed. I mean, and you'll note that this is not a solely cash funded proposal, right? There will always, I'm sure, continue to be really valid arguments for bonding. I think that's known as the generational equity argument.
Mhm.
You've heard me
Yes.
respond before that as a somewhat younger member of the future generations, right? I think there are plenty of intergenerational costs that will be transferred onto our younger members of society that they will be picking up. And so anything we can do to lighten that in any way, shape, or form is of course welcome. But yes, I think philosophically there is totally reasons to bond.
And
this
just
is all part
what
of
I
the
have
complex.
said before, and I'll say it again, is that there are other ways to manage that other than capital funding.
Of course, I agree, Madam Chair. And so then just on the nature of cash fund appropriations, just to clarify, I think in the very first year of its inception, which was 2022, when it was kind of being conceived of as a concept, I think that was put forward as an option that, well, maybe this could be directed to fund some of those architecture and engineering costs, those upfront costs you're describing. Since 2023, the year after that, with the message we've been trying to deliver pretty clearly is that we really believe there should just be parity between cash fund uses and bond funded uses, right? If it's a cap, and in fact, the final statutory language that got set up for the cash fund, which is 32 VSA 1001B, for anybody that's interested. I think attempts were made by this body to really make a parity between if you can fund it with capital, with bond funds, you can fund it with cash. It may be the case that some of the projects we find happen to be more upfront, but the idea is it would be nice to get them moved if we want to. But I really appreciate those comments. Any other questions on sort of that overview? Okay, so then I think what I'll do, if the committee will humor me, is flip to the second to last sheet in the booklet. So the very last sheet is a report that we owe annually based on 32 VSA 171A. It's a report of outstanding bond appropriations that are 2 years or older and their unspent balances and plans to spend them. And so be happy to kind of circle back to that and give committee members more deep orientation there. I expect as the session goes on, you'll want to dive into those items in more detail. Those are sort of the focus of the House. Your House counterparts have the repo committee, or the subcommittee that kind of looks specifically at reallocation. So they spend a lot of time with this report, but we're certainly happy to come in and talk about any piece of it. And I think it's helpful context when you see old appropriations for similar projects that are in the capital bills. But what I really want to focus on is the second to last page, which is the final page of what we call the capital bill spreadsheet. So the first 3 pages of that spreadsheet give all of the proposed appropriations. This final page is really what I would call described as the sources. So just to make sure everything's oriented, it should be looks like this. It says page 4 in the upper left-hand quadrant. Got these 2 big highlighted blocks of yellow. So as I mentioned a couple minutes ago, typically on the bond funded side of things, in a capital adjustment year, there are really only 2 possible sources of additional capacity beyond what was already included in the bill as passed the prior year. A quick refresher, the bill as passed the prior year is primarily based on recommendations of the Capital Debt Affordability Advisory Committee, or CDAC. They set sort of the annual amount we can prudently borrow. Historically, the governor and the legislature have both stuck to that recommendation. And then there was some bond premium and some reallocations last year. So the total is a little bit higher than the 100 million that they authorized, but that's what made up last year. So this year, and in any capital adjustment year, it's typically limited to any reallocations from prior year appropriations. I'll talk more about those in a second. That's projects that have come to completion and had some amount left over, or there have been shifts and priorities, or there's a number of reasons folks could propose reallocating. And then the second fund source is bond premium, which I've spoken to the committee about before, but just a quick high-level refresher. When we go out to issue our bonds, occasionally investors will pay a premium on Vermont bonds. We've actually recently really had some success in that space. Folks have been eager to buy Vermont bonds, maybe because as compared to some larger states, there aren't that many of them. Partly our fiscal discipline, I like to think we're a pretty safe investment. So when we go out to sell bonds, we get more money than we need for par value. That additional premium is available to fund the capital projects for which we were issuing the bonds. And so it displaces the already authorized bonding authority that was authorized in prior capital bills for those projects, because now they're just funded from premium. And so that frees up that capacity to fund new projects, which is why it gets sort of reprogrammed into a capital adjustment cycle. So I'll pause there because that's always a little bit of the moving pieces, but.
Can you point out where it is on the?
Yeah, so the reallocation section is sort of the top block. Specifically answer your question, Madam Chair, which is it's under section 17. There's a line that's the second line down says bond premium. And so the amount is given in column H at 6.858,156. But I guess I should zoom out just for a second to orient folks to the spreadsheet. Columns B through F give the totals in the Act 33 as passed. That's the capital bill last year. So everything in B through F in that light blue section, that's just a reference to last year, what's already in law. Columns G through M give what the governor's recommending to change. Any changes are highlighted in yellow. So anything that's not highlighted in yellow, those are just duplications of what's already passed in the bill, right? So as we go through, I will really only be touching on items that are in yellow with couple small exceptions. So for instance, column H on this page gives the, so the FY 26 reallocations, that's what was in last year's bill. Those are unchanged, but we are proposing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 new reallocations in FY 27. That's the block that starts with 43,190 and ends with 31,320.70. So those reallocations total about 3.3 million. Those are all projects that for various reasons are either the balance is no longer needed or have been reprioritized. I should say, just for the committee's awareness about reallocations, one of the drivers of reallocating has to do with the statute around capital appropriations. Capital appropriations do carry forward year to year, so you don't have to spend them in the first year. But if they're not fully expended in 2 years, then they wind up in this report, which was the last page that I mentioned a couple minutes ago. And so the intention there, one of the things is that the legislature can start looking at them, asking questions. Why is this money not going out the door? Project status updates. And then after 5 years, actually statute says capital appropriations can't carry forward after 5 years. So that's sort of a drop dead spending authority deadline. After that, they turn into a pumpkin, so to speak. So some of these appropriations, the first couple are ones that are pushing, that were past that deadline. And so we're reallocating. And there's pretty small balances in some cases, but I'm not going to go through each line now, just in the interest of time, but I would recommend if committee members have specific questions, they bring in the committees of the departments of jurisdiction to talk about those items, which are most of the BGS.
Yeah, so let me just
Yeah.
add something. So this section unlike all of the other sections that we had, this is funding into the capital bill, not going out of the capital bill. You can kind of call it revenue, it's not exactly revenue.
Yeah, I use the word sources.
Right, but this is income, not outgoing, which I think that's important. And then just notice the Women's Correctional Facility is one of the items. Guess there's not a line, but it's in the middle of that, and it's 600.
I think it's the 97,000.
Oh, the 97,000.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's one of so that was a particular allocation in a particular year
Yeah,
that has come due. So is the plan to put that back into the women's correction, or do we need to do that?
so specifically talking about the Women's Correctional Facility Manager, which I'll address kind of as we go through the DOC section. There is an outstanding balance as of yesterday, which includes that $93,000 of about 15.5 million that has been appropriated towards that project. I think there's 4 different appropriations, including that one. So you're correct. That one is coming up on its expiration. And so we were proposing to reallocate that funding just based on the time frame. But it's 97,000 of a $15.5 million pot of money that's sitting out there. Well, I'll speak in more detail about the correctional facility maybe when we get to that section of the appropriations.
Good. I just wanted to. Are you planning to go back on the last page?
I am, yeah.
Okay, I just have something I want to talk about.
Sure, yeah.
Okay.
But I appreciate that question. So I'll pause in case there's any other questions on reallocations, specifically the bonded appropriation reallocations in column H, totaling 3.3 million. Okay, so that 3.3 combined with the 6.85 that I highlighted, which is 2 numbers down in that same column, which is the bond premium, that combines for about $10 million of new, quote unquote, new funding for the capital bill. To the chair's point, this is sources into the bill. So that's the bond side. That's the 30%. Now the 70% of the 33.5 million total represented in this bill is all in the red section, right? And so anything in this spreadsheet in red is a cash fund item versus anything in black is a bonded item. So if committee members will examine column K, That is, again, column J is just a replication of the cash fund items that were already passed in the bill last year. Column J should be substantially the same as column E, but column K gives the new cash fund sources this year in FY 27, which make up the remaining 70% of the bill. So those are starting at the top of the numbers in column K. 17 million is the full statutory transfer for the cash fund, which is 4% of the last completed fiscal year's general fund appropriation total, less the current estimate for general fund debt service in the fiscal year. So when you perform that calculation, you get 17 million. On top of that, PY2 fund interest, that's sort of financial speak for 2 prior fiscal years ago. So, and that's in reference to FY 27. So 2 prior fiscal years from FY 27 is FY 25, which is the fiscal year that ended on June 30th of 2025. That is the last completed fiscal year as of the time we prepared this bill. So in other words, that's the year for which the books are closed. We know exactly how much interest the fund took in. We can accurately bank that in terms of available capital spending. We'll be in the process as we speak. The fund is probably accruing interest again, but we wouldn't book that until the next fiscal year. So that's how it works. So the 17 million adds to the almost 1 million, the 965,000, and that's kind of the main statutory inputs to the cash fund, and then the remainder of that column, 119,000 through the 1.5 million at the bottom. Those total, I think, 6 point something million in cash fund reallocations. So those are similar to bonded reallocations in that they are projects that, for one reason or another, we were proposing to take the balance of what was already appropriated and redirect it towards new projects or similar projects. But what I would highlight here, and I highlighted to your House counterparts the other day, is one difference here has to do with the enabling statute for cash fund appropriations as opposed to bonded dollar appropriations. I mentioned bonded appropriations. After 2 years, we have to report on them. After 5 years, they turn into a pumpkin. For cash fund, the way it was, as of this time last year, the statute originally said after 2 years, they turn into a pumpkin. There's no reporting. There's no, like, you have the spending authority for 2 years and then it goes away. I was in here, committee members will remember flagging this and saying, well, this is problematic because often it takes longer than 2 years to get the funds out the door. We're concerned we'll be unwittingly in this position where we have projects moving forward, but no way to fund them. So we had brought a proposal for parity between the two sources, that cash fund would be treated the same as the bond. Bonds have 2 years start report, and then after 5 years, they would go away. Ultimately, this body decided to extend the pumpkin date for cash fund appropriations by 1 year to June 6th, which would be let me back up, by 1 year. So it would be 3 years from the legislative session in which they were authorized. What that means is for the first tranche of cash fund appropriations that were made, which was in the session of 2023, so FY24 cash fund appropriations, those will disappear or turn into a pumpkin on June 16th of this year of 2026. So a number of these items, in fact, all of them except for the last one, are FY24 cash fund appropriations that if nothing else happens and they weren't spent, they would just disappear on June 16th of this year. So part of our process this year, and one of the reasons there's kind of a robust list of cash fund appropriations, is we really dived in with what's primarily BGS here, who had them, and asked, hey, do you think we will get these funds spent or encumbered by that deadline? And if the answer was yes, great, we left those alone. If not, we should reallocate them, because I don't think anybody in this room wants to be in a situation where we have money just tied up that's not doing anything, right? Because the earliest this body, for instance, would be able to re-appropriate it would be spring 2027. So that's driving some of this number. And again, specific items I won't go through today unless there are high level questions, but I would certainly be happy to come back and talk about any of them.
So just to clarify, they don't go nowhere, they go to fund balance. Or something like fund balance.
Yes, Madam Chair. So the appropriation spending authority and the fund balance are two separate things. These are
Yeah.
all in the, they wouldn't like.
I just don't want the public to think that they disappear.
Yeah, no, it's not like.
I mean, the authority disappears to use it.
Right, and until it's would be reauthorized, which would be a calendar year from now. pretty
Yeah.
much. So in the meantime, it would be sitting in the fund balance, yeah, perhaps earning interest, right, which in some ways is great, but it wouldn't be being spent on the projects that it was intended for.
Yes.
Cash. Somebody that likes it before us can take that monies and use it elsewhere.
Is that a question, Senator? Or
Just
yeah, so I think what we've seen in over the last couple of years is that we've had, I think, a healthy exchange between the administration and this body around cash fund transfer. And should it be a fixed amount that we commit to every year, which has been our position, or should there be flexibility? Should it be, okay, here's a suggested amount, but it can be anything up to that, right? And so we have consistently, and every governor's proposed capital budget has recommended the full amount be transferred. And I'll spare the committee my waxing poetic again about why we think that's important. But what has happened in the final bill as it's passed the legislature is often it's not, well, in every case, it has not been fully funded, but some amount
or
has been.
I guess my point is not so much the funding part of it, but it's sitting there as cash and somebody wants that cash before we can get our hands on it. They can spend it elsewhere within the budget before it reaches back to us.
Yeah, so I think, Senator, just to unpack a couple of things that you said, in terms of who can get there first. I mean, ultimately, any spending authority out of any fund, cash fund or bond fund or whatever, has to come out of this body, the whole legislature as a joint pass proposal. In terms of the mechanics of committees, right? And who kind of which committee of jurisdiction makes appropriations versus the capital bill. That's been another topic of conversation over the last couple of years. Our continued belief, and I think this was the vision since the cash fund was proposed jointly by then Treasurer Pierce and Governor Phil Scott, was that this is really capital funding. And so it should primarily deliberation should happen in this committee.
And just for the new senator, the bond is pretty much stuck to where it has to stay. That's where it's been, it has to be, and that's why it's applied for. But if there's cash sitting there, it still is able to be used elsewhere and moved around. And sometimes we don't get all the cash that we've asked for. It goes to other parts of the budget.
Understood and appreciated, Senator. Yeah, I would say that's a choice that this body gets to make and has made over the last couple of years. We continue to advocate that really, since these are primarily capital projects, this committee should be the one deciding how it's spent. And I would encourage the community to continue to engage in those deliberations. I will say, zooming out, we are continually pleased that the cash fund exists, that it's funded at all. Want to not lose the forest for the trees. That's really great. It's been growing. And at least that statutory maximum transfer has been growing. It has the potential to keep growing and be a portion, Madam Chair, of capital funding in a really meaningful way.
Mhm.
But I appreciate the comments. Any other questions on this page?
Can you show me, and I apologize, I was reading a note. You said that there was some reclamation or some reclaims on the cash fund portion, about $6 million. Where is that? Where is that line?
So Senator, that is in column K. If you drop down and skip the 17 million and the 965 and go down to it starts with 119,114.6
Okay,
And
all those together.
all the way down to.
Okay,
1.5
thank you very
million.
much.
Yeah.
Sorry, I wasn't paying attention.
No, that's, I appreciate the clarification.
And it's the same as these yellow highlight.
They're conceptually the same in that they're reallocations, yeah, and so they're available. So if you add the 17, the 965, and then all of those reallocations, you get about $23 million in new cash funding available for this bill. That's the 70% of this bill as compared to the 10 million, which is the 30% bonded. Add those together and you get about 35.5 million, which is not obvious from this spreadsheet, but that's the delta between the total capital projects in column F, which is the bill as passed last year, and the total in column M, which is this year's proposal. So if you subtract those two, you get about 33.5. If there are no other questions on the funding side of things, if it works for you, Madam Chair, turn over to the appropriation side.
How about we just go to the back page?
The back page, sure.
Yeah, I just
Oh,
wanted,
that's the one you got a question specifically on?
yeah, or I just wanted folks to know, so these are the or projects rather that have expired, basically.
So these are this is a list of
Funding.
all the bond funded capital appropriations that are 2 years or older. So they haven't expired in
Oh.
the sense that they haven't turned into a pumpkin, but they have triggered the statutory requirement, 32 VSA 701A, that we report on them to the General Assembly, what the current remaining balance is. That's the last gray column to the right. I've then added, because some of these we are proposing some reallocations, that's in the yellow block of bonded reallocations we just walked through. So I've added a column there just to tie those two things out. And then the next column is remaining after reallocation. So current balance less what we're proposing to reallocate. And then for those remaining after reallocation amounts, what the statute calls for is an anticipated timeline for expenditure. So we've given sort of seasons and years, because it's hard to pinpoint, Thursday, January 7th, 2028, but like these are sort of best estimates in time based on the project schedules. And then the final column gives some high level notes on what the funds are obligated for and any projects they may be related to. And as the committee has more specific questions, again, departments of jurisdiction can really speak eloquently to these.
Good, and well, I want to make sure that we know the amounts that have been collected for various items. And so particularly the women's facility. And thank you for having that information now, so the 15.5 million. But does that, so there's 3 areas where I see it: the women's core facility or correction facility, that's on about the 6th line where it's 97,890. But
Yeah.
now that's a proposed reallocation. But then there's also funding in the remaining after reallocation. One of them.
Yes. So
So it gets really complicated. So these numbers aren't going to, and I don't expect that they would be all that is. I don't expect that they would be the only inputs to the 15.5 million.
Right.
There's other inputs.
specifically what's missing from this report, Chair, just because it's not called for in statute, are any appropriations that are younger than 2 years old, right? So in the case of the women's correctional facility, the bulk of the 15 million was a $13 million appropriation that I believe was made in FY24. So it was not triggered by this reporting requirement. So that's not showing on this sheet. And that will be the case with some other appropriations. But yes, with specific to that project, there are 3 on this sheet for the women's correction facility. And only the one with a balance of 97,000, that's the only one we're proposing to reallocate. And that's again, just based on that's the one that's old enough that it's starting to get close to that.
That's one off this sheet.
That's the one that's on that sheet, right, Senator? So, yes, this is there's a lot.
Yeah,
There's a
so
lot going.
So the 979,000, that's 2 lines.
Yep.
Down. What's happening to that?
So that's a younger appropriation, Madam Chair, so that will not turn into a pumpkin next year. We have elected to leave, except for that 97,000, whatever 15.5 million minus 97,000 is. We've left those appropriations in place because the hope is very much that the Women's Correctional Facility will be moving forward. And we want to make sure that we have funding to advance the project when the conditions are right and we have a survey, we can move forward. So
Yeah.
that's all still available.
So that column, when you say remaining after reallocation, it's remaining after reallocation, but they will all expire in a year, right? Unless we
necessarily.
do something about it, unless we reallocate it.
No, not necessarily, Madam Chair. These would, based on the status, I mean, these are all different ages, but yeah, it's not the case that these will all automatically expire.
So what's the range of,
Well, these would be appropriations that are either 2 years old or older, and then presumably less than 5 years old. So the ones that are 4 years old, those would expire next year if we don't do anything. But the ones that are, say, 2 or 3 years, those have another 3 years to be extended.
okay, so
So there's a range there.
So does this chart combine both cash and bonded, or is it just bonded?
Just bonded, Senator. So there's no reporting requirement for cash. Because they just,
So the 2-year requirement is no longer there with cash.
there never was a 2-year reporting requirement. There was just after 2 years,
2
cash
years.
fund appropriations was dissipated.
So the one thing that is missing in the chart is at what year it's at.
It is not, yes, it is not obvious from this,
Right.
but it is
It's 3rd year, 4th year, or this is the year.
to the trained eye, Senator, which I would not expect folks to be without, instruction. The depth ID, that's the 3rd column over. That's our financial accounting system code for each appropriation. Those depth IDs actually do contain the year that the appropriation was made. It's part of the coding, but it's unfortunately somewhat complex to decode. I'm happy to walk the committee through it if that's useful, but it's not impossible to decipher which year they're from.
I just say from, again, I'm brand new with this, so just asking a question, but if you're sitting here and the committee needs to deal with reallocation, if we don't know that it's coming right up this year or 2 years from now, it makes it harder to know what's the priority.
No, I appreciate the question, Senator. And so just for some additional context, typically, this is a high level report. Typically what happens with respect to reallocations is that, well, first your House counterparts take a very detailed look at all outstanding capital appropriations, and they often will meet specifically with departments outside of the testimony in some cases to review all of their outstanding appropriations, get real detail on what's the status of this project, what's not. So there will be, what I'm, I guess, trying to say is there will be more information coming to you than just this report to make those reallocation decisions based on. And usually in those conversations, more detail is provided, like the year and some of what you're talking about.
Yeah,
It's a good observation.
so then just one other thing on this page. So when we talked before, I had asked to get a list of everything that was at least $5 million. It could be that the Women's Correctional Facility and maybe the BGS major maintenance would be the only items in that category. But so when you're figuring that out, if there's a better threshold, let me know.
Well, I think it would depend, Madam Chair, on what you're looking.
Well,
for.
I mean, and what the committee is interested in, I'm interested in how we are accumulating funding for big projects. because that's how we know where we're at.
Yeah.
In those projects.
Well, so what I might suggest, Madam Chair, and certainly happy to be part of this collaboration and in prior years, so what Scott has done to help inform the how your House counterparts is he actually has access to this same information, including the items that aren't in this list because they're not triggered by the reporting requirement, and produces a list. I mean, it's basically a printout from our financial system that would have all of the prior capital appropriations. And then it would be a pretty easy task to just filter by, insert the threshold that the committee would like to see. And what I would suspect is that the bulk, depending on where you set the threshold, the bulk of the larger appropriations out there would tend to be younger ones, right? Because we haven't had as much time to get the dollars out the door. But if that angle of analysis is certainly easy to produce.
Madam Chair, I'm step on my toes, but if I may,
Sure.
for the record, Scott Moore, Joint Fiscal Office. Every Thursday morning at 8:30, the House has a reallocation committee that needs to go over this exact list. In fact, we met this morning to determine which of these numbers have aged, which of these numbers are things we want to ask questions on. Sometimes there's no movement at all. And like we have 15 million for the women's prison, what's going on? Oh, well, we know what that's about. We know we're gonna save up for that, if you will. So the House, Senator Benson, should give an idea, this vast page, the House to do all the work and hopefully give you more money in the Senate to then have to do more spending on the different capital bill expenditures. So we do meet every Thursday morning. In fact, this morning we met, and now I have the task of all the different people we're going to send letters to. Peter's is going to get the letter of, you have, 71,000, that's that first line. What's going on with it? Are you going to use it? Can you not use it? This spreadsheet that Nick has does have some things in there, like we anticipate spending it by fall or whatever. But this gives the directors a chance to come in. I don't want to say justify, but explain what's going on with the money and making sure that it is spent and paid out the door, or can be turned back over for something else. Typically, each agency will provide an email or report or something to address what we sent to them. And we can say, yes, this particular agency had 70 million. They have a grant that's going out the door tomorrow for 50 million, because this is a living document, if you will, every day. We spend money, so that the numbers change. That process is something that we're actively pursuing on the House side.
Right, and that's very helpful that the House does that. So one other thing, just if you can, I don't think it's in the 10-year plan.
Yeah, so the way the statute is written about the 10-year plan, Madam Chair, that's been a biennial exercise. So we update that when we present the biennial capital proposal. So last year there was an iteration. I think we had some discussion about it, some points of feedback from you all. So we'd anticipate providing that again next year with the next biennial.
Okay. I would like us to look at it this year, just
Yeah.
to refresh our,
It's certainly available in the prior year.
yeah.
And I'll just say on the 10-year plan, because this is somewhat a repeat of information I gave last year, but we of course we find it to be a helpful exercise and something we go through. It's challenging in the capital space to forecast with much accuracy beyond the next couple of years. I mean, I would say, frankly, it's even challenging to forecast like 6 months from now. Look at the difference in the bill as it emerges from the legislature, from the administration. Some of that reflects differences in priorities, but some of it just reflects new information coming to light, right? So 10 years in particular, at the end of that, I think I always just caution folks not to take too much stock. It's a helpful exercise for all of us, I think, to assess what's known on the radar at this point in time, that it's really a snapshot.
Sure. But it is helpful and it's good to know.
Of course, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments?
If it please the committee, I we could walk through the appropriations themselves. That's really the meat of it. I'm sensitive to time, but
This is-
keep.
We are here for this.
Okay, well, that makes.
Okay,
Yeah.
so if there's anything you
Right.
have in particular.
And I will try to move expediently here for everybody's sake, senators.
Well,
I
just because I was pleased, I've taken this, to, the chair's, this is the point. And I just want to know, and I can go back on YouTube.
And I'm just
Well, I know what I meant.
follow up anytime, Senator.
I appreciate that, and, the women's prison situation, we have special. So we gotta figure out where we're gonna put it, and then we want to spend the money.
Yeah. And I think we all share that goal. It's like, yeah, and I'll say a couple more words when we get to that second, on that project specifically. But so I would invite committee members to look at the first page of the spreadsheet. So 3 or 4 back from where we just were, it has page 1 in the upper left-hand quadrant. And I'm gonna walk through sort of 2 columns of amounts H and K, so that both the new bonded proposals and the new cash fund. So in the top section, which is all BGS appropriations, we're not recommending any changes to the bonded side of things. But there are some new cash fund items, starting with 1.2 million, almost 1.3 million increase for major maintenance. And I guess I'll lump that together with the next one down too, which is 225,000 for physical security enhancements. Both of these are what you might call like annual capital appropriations. These are typically in the capital bill every year. These are a little different from specific project appropriations, like for instance, the women's correctional facility is just for one project. These are more kind of categories of use that are buckets of funding for a whole variety of smaller projects that if you broke them down, it would just blow up this whole bill. Smaller things like that need doing, but that are capital improvements on our buildings, which our BGS colleagues will speak at length to the extent of our portfolio and how it's aging. And, we have to keep on top of major maintenance, and physical security is something we take really seriously. So both of these pots are really both of these additions are really to right size the amount of funding available as compared to the project list of things we're tracking. So there's always a long list of major maintenance projects. Similarly, there's always a long list of security projects. And so these additions, we feel like bring us kind of closer back up to where we need to be in terms of staying on top of that list. The next one down, 3.6 million for Asa Bloomer building in Rutland. We had appropriated funding in the bill last year for this project, primarily focusing on sewer system upgrades. What was also known when we were scoping this project was that we were going to need to do some work on the skylight and the rubber membrane roof. There have since then been some active leaks, unfortunately. This is a pretty pressing priority. So the 3.6 million here will be to finish that component of the project. On prior funding. And I'm just going to keep going, and please, senators, stop me with any questions. The 900,000 below that for the multimodal garage. This is a garage attached to a facility in Rutland that houses a number of different things. There's some parking spaces. There's also the transit center lives there. There was a prior capital bill appropriation of 600,000 for sort of critical life safety upgrades. Veteran committee members will remember that, parking garages in Vermont are like not a great combination, right? From salt and studded snow tires. There's just a lot of maintenance and a lot of wear that happens. So we had appropriated some money last year for sort of critical life safety issues. This would be more like 10-year fixes and some reshoring of concrete and replacing mortar, and BGS folks can speak at more length about entirely what's in there. But then the final item here, a similar theme, there's a parking garage located at 32 Cherry Street in Burlington. This is a project we've been funding for some time. There's been a lot of appropriations made towards this. The 3 million we're proposing to add here would be based on the executed contract. We have a guaranteed maximum price for the project. This would in effect finish the project.
That's not the building that we sold,
I don't.
or the one that we have the authority to sell.
So there's 108 Cherry
Okay.
Street, which
So
not
this
to
is
be
the other one.
confused with
Okay,
this
so I
one.
want to make sure I'm not confusing him because I am.
Yeah, and I
Thank
don't
you.
believe that sale, that transaction is finalized.
Okay,
It's been a while.
but we have the authority to sell that building, 108.
I've
And it's not
that
32.
into prior, so.
Thank you.
So the total in cash fund increase for BGS is about 9. Moving on to the Agency of Human Services, which is primarily the Department of Corrections in the Capital Belt. There is the top line. This is where, folks will recall, I said there's about 10 million in new bonding capacity. The bulk of it, about 8.4, we have added here to this line for statewide improvements in HVAC in correctional facilities. So there was $1 million in FY27. That's in column C. We have upped that to a little over 9.4 million. And then on top of that, added another $1,050,000 in cash funds. So for a total of about 9.4 million in new money across both funding sources. This has been an ongoing push. I know it's a shared priority of both this legislature and the administration. This is a project that desperately needs to be done for all of our correctional facilities, and we've been working through them one at a time. It's slow work. It's, working in correctional facilities generally is difficult. There's a lot of factors that make it more complex than your typical project. They're very hard facilities. You have to work around the incarcerated population. But so this is something we've been kind of plugging away at, trying to move as quickly as we can. This funding would help finish up Southern State Correctional Facility, which is where the work is happening currently. And then based on our current estimates, fully fund the work at Northern State Correctional Facility in Newport. And then I think after that, there's just St. Johnsbury and St. Albans that would be left on the list. So I would anticipate we'll be back here next year, having discussions about those. Any questions on that line? Okay. Correctional facility safety and security upgrades. This is a 225,000 increase in cash. This is a similar line to the BGS safety and security, except this is specifically for work in correctional facilities. Safety and security can include things like cameras and fencing, but also suicide prevention efforts and Prison Rape Elimination Act compliance. There's a lot that goes into running a safe and humane correctional facility, and often it takes the form of capital investments. And so this is kind of a flexible pool of funding that they dip into to fund those types of upgrades. And again, this is us trying to right size the appropriation based on the amount of projects we know.
Yeah.
With the volatility of construction and materials, and does this number, particularly with the corrections, is going to change? And so we just allocate more. At some point, we will run out of money.
Yes, Senator. So this is another one that's kind of an annual appropriation that we appropriate new money every year. And I think unfortunately, what you're describing is capital bill exercise in a nutshell, right? That all of these costs are continually going up, and that's part of why we have this adjustment process to look and say, oh, this project that we thought was going to cost this much is now going to cost this much, and kind of constantly readjust the steering wheel a bit to make sure we're doing the work that needs to be done. And there's a lot, unfortunately, that doesn't get funded because then costs go up and got difficult decisions. So I would say generally, and I probably should have at the outset, as we go through with the governor and prioritize of all the requests, because we inevitably get more requests than we have funding for. Life safety is always a top priority. Following through on prior commitments, so projects that are started and underway. If there are instances where the legislature, the administration, both have made promises to certain communities or stakeholders, so honoring those promises. So by the time you go through all those sort of top priority things, there's often a list of, oh, this would be a really great investment if we had endless money, right? But kind of really try to focus on those top things. So, continuing down, the 2.7 million for statewide door controls, that's building on some other appropriations that were actually, there have been door control appropriations for a couple of capital bills. Most recently, in the last year, folks look up a couple items. There was one for Marble Valley and one for St. Johnsbury. This would be potentially finishing work at Marble Valley and then moving on to another facility, which is why kept the language statewide, because we didn't want to, lock into the one specific project, since we know this is going to be ongoing work throughout the facilities. But this is replacing typically relay-based, sort of legacy relay-based door control systems with more modern digital equivalents. And DOC, I think, can speak pretty eloquently on the advantages of that, and often some real programmatic updates, and I think in some cases they even help with their staffing challenges, because systems can be operated with fewer people. And so these are both from a safety perspective and an efficient operations perspective important investments. Newport at the Northern State Correctional Facility, there's been prior appropriations for a number of years, not the last capital bill, but before that, for a boiler replacement project. They, for many years, had a chunk wood boiler system that was manually loaded by incarcerated individuals. For a variety of reasons, that was both aging and the system wasn't working very well. So this is moving to an auger-fed wood chip system, and this $2 million would help finish that project. And lastly, on this line, in this section, there's a $772,000 for DCF youth stabilization facilities. Some of that is a reappropriation of some funds for that purpose, which were reallocated. There was $372,000 in a prior appropriation, and that will show up on that final sheet that we walked through. On top of which we're adding $400,000 for anticipated permit costs for this project. This is a project that has been in the works for a long time. There are some real needs in this space. We have a more secure, long-term youth facility. We, in the fall, issued an RFP for a design build contract for this, where a developer owns and builds and designs, constructs a site, and then the state would lease it back from the developer for a period of time, typically with an option to buy at some point. But those design build projects don't show up as capital build. We're not just building it and owning it as a state. All of the costs associated with those agreements typically fall in the operating budget. Which is why the committee wouldn't see those here, but these permit costs, which are prior to that development agreement taking effect, those are showing up here. And I wish I could say more specifically, just maybe anticipating some questions about that project. We, like I mentioned, issued an RFP, evaluated responses, and are still in contract negotiations on that. So there's really a limit to the specifics of what I can talk about at this point, just based on contract negotiations. But this is for anticipated permit costs for that.
Yes.
Hey, I'm not gonna ask you to confirm or whatever, and if I'm just gonna ask you a question about where I thought that project was going, and I don't think it has been allowed. Was this project originally slated for Virgins, and then Virgins did not approve the project?
That's right, Senator. We were contemplating a site in Virgins. Ultimately, the local planning and zoning commission didn't grant the change of use permit that would be required.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, if there are no other questions on that section, I think the next one, those were the two biggest ones, so move fairly quickly here. Bottom of the first page, there's just one small adjustment in commerce and community development. We're adding $20,000 for statewide historic roadside historic site markers. Those are those lovely little green flags folks will see driving around the state. This is based on just they also have a queue and they send them off to a foundry to be cast, and there are enough in the queue that they needed a bit more money for this funds their anticipated pipeline there. Moving on to page 2, there are no changes being proposed for the building community grants section. The Vermont Veterans Home, where there's just one proposed change, we're adding $500,000 in cash funding for a sewage system overhaul. I am happy to provide, if the community would like, some very illuminating pictures of the current sewage blockages at the vet's home. They experienced actually a similar problem that our correctional facilities sometimes experience of materials being flushed down the toilet that really aren't designed to be flushed, and they have these big cast iron pipes that are corroding. And so everything is getting stuck and causing backups. And cast iron, as folks I'm sure know, is expensive to deal with and to replace. So we've been assessing some different options there, but this would be a significant undertaking. And so $500,000 is our best estimate at this point. We will be continuing to define that this as time moves forward. This was kind of a late breaking thing, but obviously sewage backing up is an urgent
Yeah.
need to address,
Pretty clear.
especially for our veterans, right?
Yeah.
So then jumping down to section 9, the Agency of Natural Resources. I can go into great detail on this first item. I think I'll just abbreviate for the sake of time and say that basically due to federal action, which eliminated federal fiscal year 25 earmarks, which typically come off the top of the amount of, this is state match for a federal program. Is one state dollar draws down 4 federal dollars. There was more federal funding available this year than we had anticipated, necessitating more state match to fully draw it down. But this 2.4, almost $2.5 million, again, that's 20% state match for a larger federal funding. And these are for a variety of projects across the state to support municipal infrastructure and housing and community development generally. So something that has been in the capital zone for.
So that's gonna leverage better than $10 million.
That would be our expectations.
And we're not leaving anything on the table, right?
No, I don't believe that. That we are, Senator.
And so this is drinking water.
This is drinking water, yeah, not to be confused with DWSRF, which is a clean water state revolving
Yeah.
fund, which is down below in the clean water section. Similar story, and that's 1.5 million, similar story there actually in terms of adjustments. But yeah, those are 2 state revolving funds that leverage significant investment. So jumping back up, Waterbury Dam Penstock.
Oh, yeah, so where does the federal match money show up?
In terms of,
So as Senator Engel said, if we spend the 2 million additional, we leverage 10 in federal funds. Where does the 10 show up?
in terms of like a budget document, Senator, I believe it's would be in the DEC operating budget under their federal funds. Anticipated level, and this capital funding serves as match. But that's a good question to confirm when DEC is in here.
That's a good question.
That would be my
Good.
assumption. So then the 150 for Waterbury Dam, that's been a project that's ongoing. That is a big project. Also leveraging significant federal funding, I understand. Basically what happened here was due to the drought, there was a phase of the project that they weren't able to complete. They needed a certain amount of water flow, I guess, to be able to complete this phase. If we didn't have enough water, so that had to be pushed into the winter time. I think it's ongoing probably as we speak. But then there were associated costs with moving into wintertime construction, which kind of blew the project budget a little bit. And the only way they could stay on project budget would be to eliminate some remote monitoring equipment for the dam, which, given our recent experience with the heavy duty floods, we are not thinking is a good idea. So this is funding to backfill that cost overrun and sort of restore that monitoring equipment.
And we'll have those people in to talk.
Yeah, I have the lucky job of giving just enough information to be dangerous. You can come in and clarify everything that I botched, but the park infrastructure rehabilitation and improvement, 3-acre rural compliance. This is also an appropriation that's often in the capital bill. This is kind of a bucket for a miscellany of parks projects and recently 3-acre rural compliance, which I think the chair has expressed an interest in. So I'd encourage some testimony from FPR on that. This is not specifically aimed, this 400,000 we're adding is not specifically aimed at 3-acre rural compliance, so that would be ineligible use. Just Parks has a long list of projects, and it's similar to major maintenance for BGS, where it's sort of right sizing. And then the last line in this section, $200,000 for the development of dam maintenance and safety plans for the Department of Fish and Wildlife. So Fish and Wildlife own about 70 dams in their port, which is the bulk of ANR's portfolio, actually, on a dam count basis. They're not the most significant ones. So the Waterbury Dam and Wrightsville, those are all owned typically by DVC. There are a lot of smaller ones owned by the Department of Fish and Wildlife. Some of them do present significant hazards in the event of precipitation events. So this would be funding maintenance and safety plans for about half of them, about 20 to 40 of the 70 that they own. It would really help us get our heads around, does this dam, should it be decommissioned completely and removed? Does it need structural reinforcements? Help that long-term planning. I'll just note for the committee's long-term awareness, dam safety and maintenance is likely to be an ongoing topic of conversation in the Truthful Bill, especially after the passage of the Flood Safety Act a couple of years ago. There's some increased requirements in there and a lot of work that needs to be done. So like potentially over $100 million in aggregate of work that we need to take. So something for the committee to be thinking about on the long term. Speaking of planning, Madam Chair, that's something we're tracking. Clean water, I won't go through every line item only because what happens here, committee members will remember, is in FY27, there's a placeholder of $10 million. That's because annually the Clean Water Board, which is a statutorily created entity, meet and they have a public meeting process, a public input process. They develop budgetary recommendations for how not just this funding, but the Clean Water Fund, some other funds will be spent. So we have just adopted their recommendations exactly, which has been the practice, I believe, of both the administration and the legislature for the last days.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
There's ones in the building that they were getting less this year, but from my historical remembrance, which isn't accurate all the time, it seems to be about the same as they've always got.
So in aggregate, Senator, it's completely accurate that they are getting $10 million total, which is what they've gotten every year since I've been here. I think maybe what you were hearing about was if you look at the municipal pollution control grants line, there's a little bit less funded. That has typically been about 4 million a year, and that's now dropped a bit. And I think part of the discussion by the board there, they dropped that line a little bit in order to bump the Clean Water State Revolving Fund money a bit.
It appears like they're actually getting the same, if not more. Anywhere, right?
In total,
Right.
I think, that's right. So there's some shifting year to year, and part of it was tied up again in that federal funding change I described with drinking water. But I think, it's not significant.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, and we'll have them in here too, because I'm curious about the the clean water SRF, that we didn't have that in FY 26.
Yeah, so, and they can speak at length about this. We didn't
Yeah.
have it in FY 26 because we had some outstanding appropriation balances that would serve as that match
Okay.
in that year. So this is sort of playing back to, I don't know if this is in fact fully funding the required match, or we still have some outstanding amounts, but EDC can speak to that.
Okay, great.
So now I'm on the, well, it's the second to last page of the spreadsheet, but for our purposes today, it's the last page because we already did the last page. Just a couple more items to highlight here, starting in section 13, the Department of Public Safety. We have $500,000 for a USAR facility. That stands for Urban Search and Rescue. These are critical teams that respond in times of emergency and have been, understand, pretty integral in our flood response. This has been a priority of the commissioner and the department for some time. We are hoping to repurpose an existing state facility. We're not completely settled exactly on which one yet. We've got a short list that we're working through. So this money would help fund kind of the assessment and design, and then the initial steps on refurbishment to meet that.
So it won't be the entire project.
I think that's, yeah, uncertain at this time. In the judiciary section, we have a couple items, $500,000 for the Essex County Courthouse Connector Project. Members will remember there was 3.6 million in last year's bill for that project. This is essentially a cost overrun related to the fact that the water pressure supplied by the municipal water system, which these buildings are on, has tested inadequate to meet fire suppression code. It's just not, there's not a high enough pressure, and I understand they've tested several times and it's consistent. The water actually comes across the river pipe from New Hampshire, so the supply is on the New Hampshire side. So taking everything together, the judiciary determined that the best way to be able to meet code and continue with the project is to have a standalone pump and well system that services just this facility. So this $500,000 was their estimate of that cost. I would encourage the committee to hear from them because I think they were still in the process of refining that estimate as we speak, and it had some ongoing architecture and engineering assessments. The 1.6 million additional funding for the White River Junction Courthouse renovation, that's been a significant project in recent years, into which we've invested a lot of money. This is basically to guarantee that if there's another, God forbid, 100-year flooding event, all of that money we just spent on fixing up the courthouse doesn't wash away down the river if the bank collapses. So this would stabilize the bank immediately behind the courthouse. Newport Courthouse replacement. So this is a project that has also been in capital bills for a while, not last year, based on the sort of current status there. I guess the short summary here is that there's been a lot of movement and I'd say alignment, I think, in recent months and over the past year in Newport between municipal leadership and the Economic Development Corporation. There's a cohort of folks that are coming together around a shared vision in Newport, and they're perhaps pursuing a TIF district. And so there's a plan being developed up there. We're feeling cautiously optimistic that there will maybe a real opportunity to move this project, which has been on the docket for some time, forward. So we're adding some additional funding there to make sure we're poised to do that. And then the very last item is $566,000 for the Vermont Historical Society. As folks know, they house a number of our historical treasures in a vault, a climate-controlled vault. And the unit that services that vault is called a Munters Climate Control Unit. Theirs is at the end of its serviceable life. They were having trouble getting parts. The concern, of course, is that if that failed, we would lose a lot of really important historical stuff that we don't want to lose. So this would fund the cost of replacement and installation of that unit. So that is the end of the numbers. There are 3 very quick policy items I can highlight for the committee, and then I can be on my way unless they have other questions. The policy items can be found. So we've drafted, as we have in years past, an entire bill. The Office of Legislative Counsel will of course be taking it from here and working on your version, but this is a starting point, we hope, that reflects the spreadsheet. On page 6 of 8 of the draft fill, begin the policy items. There are just 3 of them. 2 of them relate to DEC, that's sections 8 and 9. And again, they can talk in more detail, but at a high level, these have to do with expanding eligibility for the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund program, which we just talked about some of the numbers around that. The high level goal here is just to make the universe of eligible projects larger and more in line with the state's housing goals to help support housing. So I would say these are primarily technical in nature, but I think the Department of Environmental Conservation could speak at more length about those. And then the very last point is adding authority for the Division of Historic Preservation with the approval of Secretary of Administration, the way it already is, to not just accept grants, gifts, donations, and loans, but actually to solicit for them. So effectively to be able to fundraise for historic projects. They would have to specify like a specific campaign for a specific project to which donors would be giving money. This could be used for any type of project, but of course, of note to this committee is in prior years, we've had a lot of conversation about the Ballot Bennington Monument, which we're going to need to pull all levers we can to try to come up with money to help out there. So this is designed to help that and other projects. And that's the end of the material that I was hoping to cover. I'm happy to take any follow-up questions. Get out of your room.
Great, everybody good? Well, thank you very much. Yeah, you covered everything really well.
That's the goal. I appreciate the committee's time and of
Thanks.
course, always happy to come back.
Thank you, sir.
We know how to get you.
Yeah,
Don't really know where you are. You must-
I know where to find you. So,
Yeah.
all right. thanks.
Thank you.
See you soon.
Okay, does it, do y'all want like a 5-minute break or?
Whatever you want. Okay.
I mean, I'm fine to keep going.
Madam Chair, I won't be that long, I don't think.
Okay, everybody good for that? Okay, yeah, please.
Again, committee, good afternoon. Scott Moore, Joint Fiscal Office. What I wanted to do with you guys is go over a little bit, especially for Senator Benson's application, the next step processes, if you will. As Nick mentioned in his testimony, the House is going through reallocations. We're looking at all the different money that could be out there. Hopefully to claw some back and have more money in the capital bill. So one thing I did want to go over was this spreadsheet. This spreadsheet is the spreadsheet that we will be using in the House. This is basically the booklet that Nick just presented. Couple of key differences. He has the cash in red. Red numbers usually mean something to me, so I made them blank. And then secondly, across the top, we do still have the same columns, B, C, D, E, F, G, so on. So on the far right, you see this red section starting with columns N going through columns T. So essentially, everything Nick had in his binder is this blue section, B, C, D, E, and F, and the gray section. That is Nick's binder. That's everything that he presented. Like if I typed it correctly, I put all the numbers in. The blue is last year's. Has passed. The gray is what the governor is recommending with the highlights that Nick had. Should be exactly the same. When we get into the red, this is what the House is going to be working on. Currently, this red side matches the gray in terms of numbers. Nothing's been changed.
They haven't moved numbers.
They haven't done anything. They've had a couple hours this morning with BGS to talk about section 2, but they haven't made any decisions about changing any numbers. Eventually, they're going to change numbers, and Senator Benson, what will happen is I will give them, this is version, draft 1, version 1, and then we will update this 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times. Once the House passes it, it comes to you guys, and then we're going to add another section on the far right-hand side which I will put in green. Typically, the house I think about is red for the red carpet, and the Senate's green for the green carpet, and the Senate members. So I have another swath of columns on the right-hand side. That'll be green, and that's where we're gonna make our changes the same way the house did. At that point in time, the house, the changes will be set in stone, if you will, because they've already passed it out of the house. So that said, this is the same as Nick did, and I'm going to go through all the different changes they had. I tried to make sure I kept the columns the same way. I did draw a darker black border around the cash and try to differentiate that a little bit. So we're looking at column G, H, and I, that is the bonding. The G is last year, FY26 bonding. H is FY27, I is the total. And then we get into the three columns for cash. At the top of my header here, we see cash fund section 19. And Senator Benson, just for your edification, when we look at the actual language, that cash lives in section 19. But sometimes it's easier to see the totality of the project with all of their bonding and all of their cash. So that's why it's here. And I want to make sure we realize that that is a separate section of the language in the bill. And then in columns M is the total of all the cash and all the bonding for FY26 and FY27. So you can see there's lots of different moving parts. None of it complicated, just intricate, I like to say. And then the red is the same exact idea. At the end of the day, the very last line 200 on the back page, it should be zero. Right, all the money that we have for all the sources between bonding and cash should be spent in this bill. So that's why we look at the total capital projects as the total expenditure, and the total capital funding is both cash and bonded. So do my job right, that'll be zero. So along the way, when the House makes change, they might decide for whatever reason, major maintenance for BGS. They don't need $3 million. We're only going to give them 50,000, right? So then that adds $3 million to the bottom line. At some point in time, they will then take that $3 million and move it to different other categories. Now, I would hope they wouldn't do that major maintenance, because that's how we work it. Then we need the Senate to do the same thing, and the different agencies will have different priorities. As Senator Ingles alluded to earlier, last year the House was given the transfer from the general fund to cash. The House didn't accept the full transfer, instead used that cash somewhere else. So they might make that change. So the GovRec numbers you see here for the $17 million transfer, that might change. Just as a good example of how things might change on the spreadsheet. So this is a living document. Every time we make a change in the House, if I have an update, I'm happy to bring you guys a copy so you can see. And then we'll get down to it when it comes time for us to look at the bill. We're gonna add another swath of columns. I think I'll have to find room on the spreadsheet somewhere without making it font size 3, right? So other than that, and Nick did a great job of going through all the different things that did change. So I could do the same thing, but it's really repetitive because he talked about it all. So that's my 5-minute spiel. What I really wanted to go over was just noticing this is how the next step process of what we'll do. And my goal, quite frankly, is on the back where I had these different reallocations. Nick had 8 reallocations for bonding, another 8 cash. Hopefully, the reallocation committee will add another 4 or 5 or 6 different lines to add more money available for capital project spends. But we'll see. So we're reaching out to agencies that just started drafting emails for them today. Once I leave here, we'll go back and send those emails and hopefully get some responses, and they'll let us know, oh yes, we had $1 million from 2022 that we're not going to use. You're going to have it back to do somewhere else. Questions on this at all? Nope. I really want you to see it as your first time through. For Senator Ingles and the rest, Senator Ingles has seen this way more than Senator Harrison, of course. Senator Ingles, how long were you chairman this committee?
Just a couple of years, but I was here before that, yeah.
2 or 3.
But I was very active before with Senator Mazza,
Yeah.
Senator, Benning.
So
And it got more complicated with the,
the cash, it is.
Well, we're the ones that started it. Benning, Senator Benning and I are the ones that went and started the cash fund under the direction of the administration. So for me, I very much am, very familiar with it.
Are there any mechanical questions about how the spreadsheet works? I'm looking at you, Senator Benson, mostly just because.
No, I think I've got a pretty
Yeah.
good understanding of how it's set up.
One thing I would point out is when the capital bill was first proposed, if you will, at the start of the biennium, 2-year bill, there was $100 million in bonding. So we had $100 million to use. At the end of last session, we had 125 million. Some of that came from interest in the cash fund, bond premium, cash fund transfer, so forth and so on. At the end of this year, when we're all said and done, we'll be at 150 some odd $million. So I added another 23, 24 million in sources for us to use. And they also have the uses, of course.
Yeah.
The administration did, but we can see it went from 100 million to 150 million in the course of the biennium, which is my understanding is why I kind of went to a 2-year bill, because these projects take time. You know, as construction, I'm sure you're aware, making sure the buildings get built, you can't spend it all within, a month.
Start to finish in 2 years is fast paced.
Right, exactly.
yeah, and we're just appropriating the funds.
Right.
They aren't really even starting.
Some of these things.
Some are going.
They'll use it tomorrow, and some of these things, they might need another year before they get all the design plans and construction documents and all that kind of stuff done. Kind of quick down and dirty boring presentation.
No,
for
it's not
me,
boring. It's
but-
good. Very helpful.
Yeah, and I'm happy to update you whenever they make changes so you can see. In the meantime, you'll do the same process. You go through and Ken is a new committee assistant. Look at what the House does and you can copy along with those witnesses and, share with Wendy. I
Yeah.
apologize, Madam Chair,
It's okay.
as to, what's happening. And sometimes if you have an agency that's coming like from the veterans home from far away, it's nice that they can do testimony in both committees the same day.
Exactly. Right. We have a list of folks to speak with, but now we can coordinate with the House
Yeah.
as much as possible. Good.
That's
And
all
you'll
I
be in both,
I'll
which
be
is
both.
really helpful too.
Yeah. Well, it's good because, every time you hear something different, it helps me too. This is my third time through and making sure I understand how it all works and everything. It's good for me to hear it.
Thank you. All right. Are we good?
I'm good.
Okay, and then just tomorrow, we are, we'll hear from members of the CDAC. And we'll start at 1 so that we can get out, because it's gonna be chilly. Oh, you're not gonna be here, right? Oh, you told me that, yes. So,
don't think
I
Senator
wonder if
Majors
we
is here
should,
either.
I'm sorry, what?
I don't think Senator Majors here. Well, maybe Senator Majors told me he won't be in ag. I don't know if he's not gonna be in the afternoon.
Well, if both of you are gone, we might wanna postpone the CDAC. So I was planning on doing
You wanna-
CDAC in multiple days, but still, especially, with you being the new teacher. I think we should postpone the CDAC. You guys, okay, if we don't have a meeting tomorrow?
Whatever you wanna do, Chair.
Okay,
Yeah.
we'll just have study hall. Okay, and those of you who want to stay here, we can do study hall, because we have a lot to learn.
You can work on your expenses and.
I was thinking,
Thank you, Jeff.
yeah, that's, okay. That sounds good. So, we are adjourned. And then we will hear when we are actually, live. There's a delay, so it's